Hello, and welcome to the Alpha Male Podcast. The podcast where we talk about being an alpha male the right way, with God at the center, with Judeo-Christian values and worldview. As always, I am your host, Michael Melito. First and foremost, a servant of God. God is number one. I hope to recognize that, and everything in this podcast is no different. If you want to skip the bio, you can skip to around 3 minutes in, if you've heard it before. Joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. After my combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. After my Marine Corps time, I was a law enforcement officer for quite a few years. I served in LAPD, regular assignment and more specialized assignment. Work in the streets of LA by God's grace, not because I'm anything special, because He had a purpose for me and chose to save me. He got me through some of the nastiest war zones and some of the nastiest streets in the country. I also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I was a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency that I won't specify. FBI and NRA certified firearms instructor. I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember. State rifle and pistol champion a few times over. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Also been a professional big game hunter and guide. That's a nutshell version of the bio. Again, first and foremost, I'm a servant of God, a teacher, a preacher, and a fisher of men. With that, guys, let's get into today's topic. I'm planning for this to come out on December 25th. And what's more fitting for December 25th than an episode on improvised weapons? I mean, really doing some damage with some improvised weapons. Now, this is kind of a placeholder for an episode that I got a request for from the original patron. And I don't know that he wants a shout out, but he knows who he is. The original patron. The one that caused me to set up Patreon because he wanted to support. And I was like, I better figure something out. So I set up Patreon. And GoodShepherdTraining.com. Anyway, he asked for one on hand-to-hand combat, and I would like to do one, but I would like to have on a guest, because he asked about a few things in particular I didn't mention in the bio, but as you can imagine my background, I have quite a bit of hand-to-hand combat experience. I didn't mention it, but I've wrestled for quite a few years in high school. I was one of the captains of the wrestling team in high school. I have a little bit of mixed martial arts, MMA background, and fighting and training, Marine Corps martial arts, and let's just say I've been in my fair share of fights for whatever reason on the streets as a cop in LA. I've been in more hand-to-hand tussles than I care to remember. Some justified, and honestly, some not. I didn't grow up a Christian. I became a Christian later in life with a different view on violence than I have now. I have a more centered, more righteous view of it now by God's grace. But I want to do an episode and have a guest on, a guest that I know very well, as much as I know most people, and he is versed in Krav Maga and Sistema, which I am really not. So I hope to have him on soon. I just got to figure out the logistics. Can't just talk into my iPhone for that one. I have to actually sit down and figure out the logistics of having him and getting the audio quality nailed down. So this one is not in lieu of that, but I guess holding that place, and that one will be out hopefully shortly. But hopefully this one comes out December 25th. That's the plan anyway. And this is on improvised weapons. And I'll start with a kind of cool story. So I was with my wife in Florida, and we were visiting her niece. Her niece is, I don't know, between 4 and 6 years old. I can't keep track. She's got a lot of little ones in her family. But this girl's adorable. And we're doing something, a pillow fight or like a wrestling match or something, just with the kids, just, having fun. And it said something about not using a weapon, and she looks around and says, anything can be a weapon. And you know what? She was right. Pretty much anything can be a weapon. So I guess a shout out to Rayleigh for that, kid wisdom. Pretty much anything can be a weapon. Going in, if you are justified, if you decided that taking action is the right action, that using force is justified and right, whatever kind of force that's going to be. I'm not talking about just a mutual combat thing, a sparring match, whatever. I'm talking about like somebody is trying to really hurt you or somebody else. You need to do some damage and you don't have a weapon for whatever reason. You've been neutered because you're traveling or whatever reason that might be. Improvised weapons are, what we call in the military a force multiplier, and they really can be. I think every man, and we'll get to that in the other episode I was alluding to, should know how to use his hands and his feet and his body as a weapon. But there are things, almost anything can be used to multiply that force. But one thing about getting in a fight, if you're going to do it, and do it without fear, like an alpha male. If you've been in a fight, if you know what it's like to get punched in the face, to have a broken nose, a bloody nose, broken fingers, knocked out teeth, and the other guy is scared of that and you're not, whatever technique you have or whatever thing you have, that gives you a distinct advantage. So as that alpha male, I guess put the tactical tip up front, don't be afraid. And a tactical verse for that, you'll find in the first chapter of Joshua. No man shall be able to stand before me all the days of my life. Believe that and go into it without fear. If you're justified, and if God is for me, who can be against me? So for improvised weapons, let's get into one of my go-tos when I travel. And that's just a big, thick leather belt that I got at a secondhand store and a big, thick brass belt buckle that says LAPD on it. That's just because I used to be LAPD. I think I was at the time when I bought it. I've had it for probably at least a decade. I think I bought it Rodeo Drive, maybe. I believe I bought it in LA, so that had to have been at least a decade ago. But it's one of my go-to travel things, and it's just a big brass belt buckle with a big, thick leather belt. And it's easily ripped out of my pants, and it's easily could be used as a very good improvised weapon. And you can travel with it, you can fly with it, you can go around the world with it. I don't know of any TSA that's going to be like, oh, hey, that belt buckle is too big. And that's a fine weapon. All the little tiny things that they think they're protecting people from by taking away, like, a little teeny razor blade or a little tiny, Swiss Army pocket knife. What would you rather have in a fight? A little teeny tiny, not locking Swiss Army knife, or a giant brass buckle with a big leather strap on it? So that's going to be one of my go-tos, I guess, because that's going to be my number one, because I've had that thing for, like I said, probably at least a decade or more, and it goes with me often when I travel. Still have it. Great improvised weapon. Along those lines, that very similar to that, one of those metal water bottles that you can fill with water, or with anything, I guess, but a good stainless steel water bottle with just a 550 cord or rope lanyard tied on it. That gives you some more leverage. Again, you could travel with those anywhere. A lot of people carry those nowadays. Nobody really bats an eye. But get one with a good size and shape. Again, a good steel water bottle with a good lanyard on it. A 550 cord lanyard, or even, one of those survival bracelets or something on there. The 550 cord bracelets on there that you can grab and get a little bit more leverage. But, you could do you could really multiply some force with that thing. I guess another little tactical tip, because I'll probably forget it in there. Also, if you wanted to, throw an ounce of silver in the bottom of your water bottle, it will, one, give it a little bit of weight, and two, silver is an antimicrobial, antibacterial, antiviral, as I believe. So it's not going to hurt anything throwing an ounce of silver in there. And if you ever needed to barter or trade, or you find yourself stuck somewhere with, you left your wallet or you left a bunch of stuff, or people got the best of you and they just left your water bottle, because who's going to take a water bottle? At least you got an ounce of silver in there. Anyway, that's a good little tactical tip. Copper also has a lot of those qualities if you don't want to throw an ounce of silver in there. But ounces of copper, you can usually find those in the same places. I'm talking like pure copper, not a penny, which is not really mostly copper. It's other stuff, cheaper metal. Anyway, just a little side tip there. And another really good one for travel or for things like that you can have on you that is a good choice is just a padlock with a piece of chain on it. And if anybody ever asks you what it's for, say, it's for securing my bag or for whatever, so my stuff doesn't get stolen. Or for my gym locker where I'm going to, or whatever the reason is. I've never had an issue with those. The cable locks, or just like I said, a padlock with a piece of chain on it. Now, don't get it so big as to be ridiculous. I know they make some really giant brass, really big padlocks, and you might get a second glance for that. But just a regular, normal size padlock with a piece of chain on it. Just tell them it's for your gym locker or for securing stuff in a locker or whatever. And that's a pretty good improvised weapon, a padlock with a piece of chain. Or even those little cable locks. Generally, when you buy a gun, I think it has to, by law, come with a cable lock, and almost nobody uses those things. At least I don't know anybody that does. So those cable locks, you can just put one or two of those on your bag. You probably already have a few if you're a gun owner. And instead of just throwing them away, put them on your bag, and then something happens, you have a makeshift improvised weapon. I guess makeshift improvised weapon is kind of redundant, huh? Another good one is a pen. Now, I know they make all kinds of tactical pens, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have those, but that's not really an improvised weapon. They're kind of designed to be a secondary weapon. But just a good metal pen. Like in the military, the pilot pens. Those are awesome to have anyway, and they're metal. They are definitely a force multiplier. Obviously, that could be deadly force, so use that if you own, be righteous if you decide to use that force. But just a good metal pen. I forget the one that I've had for a long, long time, but I think it's a Zebra 701 maybe. But it's a really thick piece of steel or aluminum pen. I think I had it for over a decade and never managed to break it. But just a good metal pen. I guess any pen could be, but if you're carrying one that for your EDC, that would be better. Just a good thick metal pen. Doesn't have to be a tactical pen. It definitely could be, but if we're talking about improvised weapons, just a good metal, brass, aluminum, stainless steel pen. And they're good to have anyway. And there's even a company, men too, that make really good AR magazines. And they also make a tactical Sharpie, which looks like a Sharpie, but it's a self-defense weapon. That's pretty cool. You can look those up, and I don't think they're too expensive. And a Sharpie, not that one, but just a regular mini Sharpie is pretty much part of my EDC. It comes in handy all the time. There's a really cool, a side story, a sidebar. Recently, my nephew, who's a great kid, a great young man, he's an Eagle Scout. He's a man. He's over 18. He's a man. Eagle Scout, recently he said that one of his buddies got jumped. And I don't know the story. I wasn't there. But he said one of his buddies got jumped and was greatly outnumbered and kind of got worked over. He was asking me about different things. And one of the products I recommended is by Bone Tactical. And it's called the Bone Opener. And it's a quote-unquote bottle opener and multi-tool. It has like a Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver thing on it. But if you look at it, it doesn't take too much imagination to realize that that can be used as a really good improvised weapon. Guess you couldn't say it's designed as a weapon, because then it might be an issue if you ever use it as a weapon, that you were carrying it as a weapon. But if it's a good bottle opener that just happens to protect your knuckles and multiplies your striking force, then it's a pretty good improvised weapon. And again, it's a bone opener. And those aren't cheap. They run about $80. I've had one before. I lost mine on a trip. I haven't replaced it yet. But my nephew just recently, out of all the suggestions I gave him, he decided to get that, which is pretty cool. So we can carry that as part of his EDC now, hopefully. Because brass knuckles are a felony in a lot of places, but I don't believe those, because they are designed to be a bottle opener and a multi-tool, would be. Check your own laws on that. But they make another product that isn't $80 if you don't want to spend $80 on one. And I saw these when I was looking for this for my nephew to get. And I guess this came about during the whole COVID thing. And it's called like a door opening tool and button pushing tool. And if you look at the shape of it, you see all the pictures, and it's designed to like grab onto a door handle so you don't have to touch it for COVID, or designed to like punch a keypad so you don't have to touch it, which is not bad in and of itself. But I think a lot of people would have even less problem with you explaining why you have that. And if you look at the shape of that, that could definitely be a good force multiplier. And they're a little aluminum or steel. I don't know. I never had one, but I was just looking at the pictures. Just a little piece of metal. And if you look at them, it looks like you could grab them pretty well between your index finger and your other fingers and greatly multiply force with those. And again, those are like $7 to $10 on different places, eBay, Amazon, wherever. Door opening tools. So again, you might want to check those out. This next product is pretty cool. I had it last time I went to Europe, which has been quite a few years ago now. If you don't know, I'm Italian. My mom came here from Italy when she was 5. A lot of my family still lives in Italy. I haven't been there recently. They've had a pretty rough time with COVID. But when I go over there, last time I went over there, I was aware of this product and carried it and never had an issue with it. But it's called a Sap Cap. If you Google that and search it, you can find it. It's a Sap Cap. It's just a baseball cap, but it has lead shot like you would use for hunting waterfowl or whatever. But it has metal shot sewn into the rim of the cap. So you grab the bill of the cap and you swing it, if you're familiar with an old school sap, which is basically a piece of leather with a piece of lead inside of it that was used for like bar fights and bouncers and police officers. You know, when I was in LAPD, we weren't allowed to use them, but we still had, because of the uniform carryover, our pants still have the Sap Cap pocket in it to carry saps. We carried batons for whatever reason. They thought beating somebody with a baton was better than beating them with a sap, which, whatever. But anyway, cops use those for quite a long time. And they make this product called a Sap Cap. And I suppose you could just say that you had it so that the wind didn't blow your hat off if anybody ever did notice it. But it just looks like a regular baseball cap. And just from hitting myself with it, it's quite a bit of a force multiplier, a big hunk of lead with some leverage on it. Like I said, for Europe, for traveling places like that, never had an issue with it. Nobody would even notice it. It just looks like a baseball cap. I guess that's technically cheating if I'm going over improvised weapons, because I think that is designed to be a weapon, but it doesn't look like a weapon, so I'll throw it in. Brushing on the police officer days, the LAPD days, if you ever, should find yourself in a situation where a mob of people is coming after you or whatever, I'm never advocating this, but if you can get a hold of a car antenna is a pretty good improvised weapon. You would get complaints of that all the time of, people breaking off car antennas as a police officer for a couple of different reasons. But a car antenna, a lot of the newer cars don't come with the big old school metal antennas, but a lot of the older cars did. The car antenna, I would encourage you not to vandalize it if you absolutely had to protect life or limb. Pay the people back or find out whose car it was or repay them or whatever. But, that's one. And here's another one that I learned from my police officer days out on the street, especially in California, where carrying most kind of knives is a felony, which I think is, anyway, it is what it is. Carrying most knives is a felony in Los Angeles. So what the homeless population would do, or what, ne'er-do-wells would do, is they'd carry a big flathead screwdriver or a big Phillips screwdriver, which is a nastier weapon, a more effective weapon than your average pocket knife. And it's not a weapon, it's a tool. If somebody attacked you and you had to use it as a weapon, then you just happen to have a big flathead or Phillips head screwdriver on you. There's really nothing they can do about that. But that was a very common improvised weapon that, homeless people or other people would carry on them in Los Angeles. In fact, I remember very distinctly in the police academy we would have to write narratives to do our police reports to get good at it, because a lot of police work is paperwork, a lot more than the average person that just sees police on TV would think. And I remember one of our assignments, I still remember this was a long time ago, was, responded to the scene such and such a time, and this person stabbed the other person with a screwdriver. And I remember thinking, that's kind of funny. And then I got out on the street and I was like, oh, that's a real thing. That actually happens. People stab each other with screwdrivers out here. So a screwdriver, pretty nasty improvised weapon. Along that line, anybody in the military will tell you the military shovels, the e-tools, are a nasty improvised weapon and a good thing to keep in your car. I have one of the cold steel little shovels that's designed to be a weapon, so I guess not improvised, but an e-tool, entrenching tool for the military. But along those lines also that I carry generally right by me in the car is a big breaker bar. Everybody's familiar with tire irons and crowbars. A big breaker bar, which I use to loosen, I actually do use it for lug nuts on my Hummer. But also, it's just a big, long piece of really strong tool steel. And if you can't think of how that's an improvised weapon, you're listening to the wrong show. But a big old breaker bar in your car. Or a giant wrench. A big pipe wrench. I don't think anybody would have any issue with somebody having a pipe wrench or a big breaker bar in their truck. That's just kind of part of having a truck. One that my nephew reminded me of, and when he said that, I remember when I was a kid, my father would always carry a roll of nickels in the glove box. A roll of nickels in the glove box. And my nephew reminded me, or he suggested, a roll of quarters in tape, like with tape, electrical tape or something wrapped around them. But yeah, a roll of nickels or roll of dimes, depending on what size you want. Right there in your center console, you can just grab them. Now, don't leave them out in the open. People may break into your car, even for change. But covered up with a bag or something like that where you can just reach over and grab them, I suppose. But yeah, roll of change. And the last two are not improvised weapons, and they're designed to be weapons, but maybe using them in a different way. If you have to get somebody off you, if you can't get to your handgun, a magazine, it's filled with ammunition, which is partially lead and partially metal, and a magazine can be a pretty good blunt weapon if you have to use it to get to your other weapon. Or if you're in a situation where you don't want to pull the trigger, you don't want to use deadly force. Unless you're using, even a plastic Glock could be. But if you're using a more traditional weapon, a 1911, a revolver, a J-frame revolver, they make a pretty good blunt instrument. I guess not an improvised weapon, because they're designed to be a weapon, but improvised into using them a different way. With that, Alpha Males, I hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Alpha Male Podcast. I hope you like listening about improvised weapons. I hope you're already subscribed, and I hope you've already liked and left a review and a comment of the podcast. But if you haven't, hopefully you'll do that. Like I said, I hope to do one, God willing, on hand-to-hand combat. I think it would be a better one with that guest I was talking about. So I want to hold off and do a better episode than just doing one. Like I said, I really think that guest will make it a good episode with both our blessings and experience. So if you're not subscribed, hopefully you will. If you want to support the podcast, don't forget to go to goodshepherdtraining.com, scroll down to the Patreon link. If you're already a patron, I really do thank you for this, being able to do this. If you don't know, we recently hit a milestone by God's grace. If you don't know, these are free to listen to, but they're not free to produce. I have to pay a provider to load these and hold these on the internet. I'm just a simple man. I don't have a giant server somewhere with all this content. I load it up on that server, and I reached the limit of that I've been paying for. And if it wasn't for the support of patrons, I probably would have just deleted a bunch of the older episodes and had to keep deleting older episodes as I put out new ones. But since I have people supporting the podcast, I'm able to keep all that old content up if you want to go back and listen to an older episode, which I assume people like to do. because of things like that, because of patrons, we get to do things like that and keep that content up for people that want it. And a sincere thank you if you feel called to do that. Really am humbled that anybody listens, and I'm really humbled that anybody wants to support the message. So consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com and scrolling down to Patreon if you want. And if not, don't feel guilty about it. I have no doubt that my God supplies all my needs. So thanks for staying tuned till the end. I will give you a better piece of advice than all the cool improvised weapons we talked about, and that is situational awareness. Being aware of your surroundings, and if you can, there are times when you should, I believe, as an alpha male, intervene and protect those weaker than you, and step in and protect women and children and widows and orphans and protect those, protect the least of these. So I'm not saying avoidance is always the right answer, but obviously Jesus tells some of his disciples to carry swords. He also says to turn the other cheek. You should pray and be in touch with the Holy Spirit and know when righteous force is justified. But situational awareness will go a long way in avoiding situations that don't need to be use of force situations. And situational awareness will often give you the advantage, so you're acting rather than reacting. Situational awareness, even if you do decide that action is the right thing, can really help out before, during, and after an encounter. So situational awareness. And one of the things that I would do, I guess I forgot to mention it in the bio, but I was the commander of a tactical team, and one of the things I would do when I was walking around a large metropolitan area, and I would encourage my guys to do, is look for things that are out of place. And that, varies. I'm not talking about like people that seem out of place, because in a big metropolitan area you get some really colorful people, and that's just part of it. But just things that don't seem right, like it's really hot outside and somebody's wearing a really big jacket. Why might that be? Or just another game to hone your situational awareness. If you're in a crowd of people, pick like a weird, random, not common color and see how fast you can find somebody wearing said color. Even if it's just a tag of a garment or something like that. And that's just, you could do any manner of variations on that. If you're stuck in an area with a lot of people, airport, something like that, just scan and do that with yourself to improve situational awareness. So I guess that's a tactical tip for the day. With that, alpha males, until next time, be strong and prove yourself a man. Have a blessed day.